Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about my own personal health story. Um, let's just get into it. It was a few years ago now. Um, I would say it was before the pandemic that I was taking a shower and I noticed that under my arm I had like what I thought was like a mosquito bite or something, but it was like really weird because when I was feeling underneath there, it just kind of felt a lot more deeper within the tissue. So, I kind of like shrugged it off a little bit and I was like, well, maybe it's I don't know. I don't know what I thought it was. I was just like, well, maybe it's, how you get those ingrown hairs. I was like, well, maybe it's like a ingrown hair and it'll just go away. But I waited a few days and it never went away. So I was like, okay, let me go to the doctor and get it checked out. So I went to my primary doctor and she checked it out and she was like, I'm going to have you schedule an ultrasound. And I was like, okay, usually there's no need for me to, get alarmed about anything like that because usually the stuff comes out and it's just like, oh, it was an ingrown hair or something, something minor, nothing really to be concerned about. So when I went um, to the clinic to have the ultrasound, they were like, yeah, we see that you have two lumps here in your arm. And I darn near passed out like, well, what do you mean you see two lumps in my arm? Like, what? I was just shocked because I just didn't, I was like, well, immediately your first thought is, well, is it cancer? So, they were like, well, we don't know. We can't tell you any really concrete information. You're going to have to go and get a biopsy. So here I go. Okay. They scheduled a biopsy. Meanwhile, they're telling you, oh, don't worry, just schedule your biopsy. And I showed up for my biopsy and I and it was a cancer center. It was a cancer center um, in Minnesota, and I showed up for my biopsy. And the one thing that I just remember, it was like, how I don't know in cartoons, like you hear dun 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 dun, dun, and you were just I was walking down this long hallway at the hospital, and it just it just I just felt such a heaviness, like such a heaviness, because even in the room where the where you change your clothes to put on the gown, even in the room, like the one that I went into, it was full of people's tissues, like their tears of whatever diagnosis that they had received. And I remember walking to the room with and changing my clothes and just being struck by, oh my gosh, like just balled up tissue. Nobody just cared to like even pick up the tissue and throw it away. It was just heavy, and I felt the sadness. I felt the worry. I felt everything in that moment because I was going through. I was going through um, the feeling of oh my God, like you can't heart like that feeling of I can't hardly breathe. Let me try to gather my breaths because I can't imagine that this would be a part of my story because I'm a healthy person. I didn't eat a lot of sugar. I'm just trying to figure out like, oh my God, where could this be? I'm not even like, I don't live a really stressful life. So it was just like, oh my gosh. So when whew, when I was doing the biopsy, which was pretty quick, the lady who was the nurse assistant was trying her best to focus my mind on not thinking about what the doctor was going to be doing. You know, she was like asking me about my kids, and you know, it was awesome because when you ask me about my kids, my whole focus, my whole mental, my mind goes like directly to them, which is like an awesome thing to ask about when you are in situations of distress, when you're in situations of, you know, panic. Like, the things that I've learned that settle me is my kids, thinking about my kids, but also thinking about what my passion is. Because for me, it was the harder the stress that I would be under, whatever opposition that I was facing, I needed something equal to counter that. And the only thing that I've found out to counter something that is so dire in crazy situation is countering it with something that I love, like my passion. So when the lady was talking to me about my kids, asking questions about them, I immediately, my heart started to kind of like settle down because, you know, she's a professional. She knew that, you know, women are sitting in that or laying on that bed and they're, you know, panicking, thinking, you know, am I going to be counting my days, or is this just like me going through a smoke screen? So they did the biopsy, and I remember like just this feeling of, you have your family, you have your friends, you know, but essentially you go through it by yourself. You go through that smoke screen or that situation by yourself because you're experiencing, you know, the pain of everything. You're ingesting it, and it was so it's very hard for me to stay focused and have my mind like centered on, hey, I'm going to get through this with the help of the Lord. So they they took the biopsy. Meanwhile, I'm literally like shaking, like, oh my goodness, like up, you know, just I just couldn't, you know, fathom it and put it together. And they send you home and they're like, okay, you have to wait for 3 days, you know, and then we'll give you the results. Like 3 days, 3 days seemed like 17 years. It was like how, 3 days. And I remember those 3 days, and it was the longest 3 days of my life. Like, I remember being up at 3 a.m., like just staring at my husband while he was knocked out. He was knocked out sleep. And I just remember staring at him like, oh my God, like, what if this is just the end for us? Like, what if, what if this is the end for me? And, you know, I started telling him, okay, if this is it for me, then I need you to you know, take care of the kids and do this and make sure you do this and that, the case, you know, whatever the case may be. Like, just trying to, you know, try to think positively, but still being aware that, you know, life is life and sometimes life happens. And if this is where I'm headed, then, you know, I need you to take care of my babies, you know, make sure they're good. And he was just not having it. He was just like, you know, we're believing on faith, you know. He just came in, kicked in with that strong power muscle, like, shoom, this is what we doing, you know. And I was just like, me too, I'm believing on faith. But that fear, that gut, that palpable, that fear, it was just like, it was palpable. It was, I woke up in the morning, I thought about it. I went to sleep at night, I thought about it. I thought about it when I was brushing my teeth. I thought about it when I was combing my hair. I thought about it like when I was taking a deep breath. It was every moment I was thinking about it. And it was like, how can I get through this? Like when God says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I mean, it's that walking through it that can seem so scary, that can seem so vividly just real, where you literally feel like this is it for me because you're walking through the valley, and I look back, it's like he teaches me so much. And in humility, I look back and was just like, how did I ever make it through that? Because, like I said, those 3 days were like 17 years. But in those 3 days, I started to look at life so differently. It was the things that I thought that mattered, like, oh, my house, I was always fixing something on my house. I was always painting something in my house. I was like, oh, this needs to be done, or I got to do this project, or Jerron needs to do this, or around the house, or I need to get my kids doing this, or they need to do that, and this and that. And it was like, none of that stuff mattered. My house did not matter. I could care less. The car didn't matter. What people thought of me, it just didn't matter. The thing that I went to was my children. So I started to like take walks with my children. And I remember Jerron and I, we drove up to, we lived by the Mississippi River, and it was down the street from our house, like at the end of our block. And what we did was we just took a walk. And during this time, the river was receding. So you could actually, it was receding a lot. So you could actually walk along the river edge, and where it would normally be covered by water, you could walk along the river's edge and just like see what was there. And it was just a bunch of like shells and stuff like that. So we just started to collect it. And I started to talk to my children, like one by one. I just started to talk to them about their life, about lessons, things that I wanted them to remember that mommy always told them, like things that I knew God would want me to impart in them if something were to happen to me. Like I just wanted them to be okay. I just wanted to be able to prepare them in every way that I could for life, even though that they're so young. It was like it taught me that life is so short. The things that matter are in front of you, and God gives those things to you freely. He doesn't charge you for seeing the beautiful smiles of your kids. He doesn't charge you for seeing the beauty in the sun, or the awesomeness of the stars, or the constellations, or the moon. That's like the free glory of God that manifests itself every day in the things that we just take for granted. And I remember when I was in the car, I went to the car a little bit earlier than the kids in Jerron. They stayed at the river a little bit longer because I wanted to just sit down and collect myself. And I remember this woman was coming out of her house, and I had my windows down, and she walked past the car, and she had the biggest smile on her face. And like, people smile every day. People smile. They're like, hey, yeah, hey. They smile every day, but it was the way this lady was smiling. Her smile just covered her whole face. And it was just like she was just beaming. And I remember looking at her being like, wow, her smile is so beautiful. And the sun was shining. It was bright outside. And I remember thinking her smile is just incredible. And she was just walking. She was walking her dog, and she looked at me, and she turned and she said, it's a beautiful day outside today. And I was like, and I looked around like, it is. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, the wind is softly blowing. It's like 75 degrees outside. It is a beautiful day. Well, Anea, when have you took the time out to just look at the day, to just enjoy the day? Like, you've taken those things for granted. And I believe the Lord was just showing me his grace in those moments, because like it was just I was taking in life. I was taking in life. Ain't about stuff. Life ain't about what people think about you. Life ain't about, let me put on this persona to be this, or so that people can think this of me. It's just it at the end of the day, when you look back on your life, when you're at the end of your road, you want to been you want to have invested everything you could in your kids. You want to have taken walks, enjoyed nature, enjoyed your passion, invested in your passion, loved a lot, like, and God was just having me take those moments in and breathe those moments in. And when the 3 days was up, about, I would say, like it was like the second day. The first day I was struggling. The second day I was struggling. That third day is when God began to kind of like show me, hey, Anea, pace yourself. This is what life is about. Taking care of your body, not throwing garbage in your body, you know, minding your spirit, minding what your spirit ingests. And so by that third day, when it was time for me to get the results, they told me that, it was not cancer. It was, um, it was, it was like lumps that come, sometimes unexplainable sometimes, and they just go away. And the amount of rejoicing that I felt, the amount of thankfulness that I felt when I got on my knees to pray and thank God, thanking was on a different level. It was just like, I couldn't just thank God for myself. I'm like thanking God for my children, for all three of my children, thanking God for my husband, like thanking God for my family, because, they didn't have to go through this with me. And the thing is that I know people do have to go through it. I understand it on several levels, on watching someone that I loved go through it, and then actually having to go through parts of it, of just, this is what it's like. And just that this is what it's like was enough for me. Because when I asked God, I'm like, well, God, what do you want me to do? Like, what do you like? What, And he was just like, Anea, run, redeem the time, redeem the time that you have. You don't have time. You have to go. You have to run. And that's what I would share with you guys today. Life is beautiful. There's things about life that's unfair, that's messed up. Yes, it is. But there's things about life that are so beautiful that we take for granted every day. And life doesn't have to be perfect for us to enjoy the simple things. Life doesn't have to be perfect. God's giving you breath. God's giving you the ability to go take a deep breath and go outside and take a walk. Take your shoes off in the grass. Things like that we take for granted. So I would like to encourage you guys today, from my story. I didn't have cancer. If you do have cancer, if that was your diagnosis, I pray God would just comfort you and give you peace, and the peace of God, the peace of God that actually passes understanding, because I know in that time you need ministering angels, you need God's presence, his tangible presence, you need family members holding your hand, helping you through it. So my prayer for you today is, when you do go through the valley, that you know that there is hope even in the valley. Whether your diagnosis be yay or nay, there's always hope in the valley. The hope in the valley. Because the valley is sometimes like a smoke screen. And when the smoke clears, you can see your path. You can see your road. So I just encourage you guys to be blessed today. remember that life is a blessing that we should not take for granted. Be blessed.